Right. Yeah, so today we're here to talk to you about dbt and Gen AI. So we chose two of the greatest buzzwords in data over the past few years. And first of all, let's talk about the Foreman itself. In physical logistics and warehousing, the Foreman is usually a supervisor. So the person who knows everyone, where everything is, what everything costs, who is buying, who is supplying. Usually, he is the guy you go to if you need to know something about a warehouse, whether it's a small warehouse or a big warehouse. We don't work with physical warehouses, but we do work with other type of warehouses in data, as in the data warehouses. Data warehouses used to have problems in the turn of the century and leading up to 2010s, as they became places of siloed data with high maintenance and operational costs that didn't really fit into the modern software development process because they didn't really adopt DevOps processes. This led to poor data governance and lack of flexibility, which saw the rise of solutions like the data lake and lately the data lake house or the beach house or whatever new concept you want to throw at it. But in the last few years, especially since the cloud revolution, we saw the data warehouse making a comeback because they became more flexible, they became easily accessible, but they also did something really nice, which was to bridge this gap by turning into proper DevOps and DataOps processes, which made them easier to work with, but also more effective. Despite this, we keep seeing reports that say, okay, we have warehouses and lakehouses, or data lakes for that matter, full of inventory, i.e. data, but we still see issues. People often talk about poor data quality, poor usage, and the worst of all, up to 73% of company data goes unused for analytics, and this is a sentiment that we see very often, that the potential of data, even though organizations want to be data-driven, is not met. But if we are investing in better tools, why is this the case? Why don't managers and why don't business people and practitioners believe in their data or use their data more? We see this as, well, there are many issues, but the main one we want to tackle and which we are approaching is data literacy, right? So from our perspective, there's a gap between what the business users want, what the business users do, and what the data teams know and provide. This is represented here by the classical extreme example of business needing information to answer a problem, but none of the information that they need is actually documented or readily available to be consumed, even though most of the times that data already exists, they just don't know how to access it. On the other side, we also see that there's this cliff or this gap between data teams and business users, which really shouldn't exist and they should coexist more. So, what are data teams doing to help with this? One of the things that they are doing, and this will save us a lot of time because of Sam's great talk, is they are using dbt, right? dbt is very helpful in bridging this gap, especially because of the analytics engineering concept. The analytics engineering concept, also as Sam already alluded to, is an attempt to bridge this gap between the software engineering expertise of data engineers and the business domain expertise of the business people or the data analysts. So when they bridge together, they can produce more because language is consistent, data is consistent, so usage is also consistent. On the other hand, dbt is also very good at making things pragmatic and static, and by this I mean looking, for example, at the dbt docs. A dbt project automatically generates a manifest.json and a catalog.json, which provide you with a structured approach to your documentation. And this comes for free out of the package once you build your dbt project. On the other hand, we also see Gen AI becoming way more popular and way more used in organizations. There was a recent report by Google, the Google's Data and AI Trends report from this year, 2024, in which they said that the usage of AI in terms of data analytics and literacy leads to better decisions and ultimately greater success in the market. But another key point that we would like to emphasize is that a lot of the usage of Gen AI is not necessarily by a technical audience. It's from non-technical users, which is a concept that from the rise of tools like dbt, it's a little bit dying out because, as they claim, there is no such thing as a non-technical data analyst. Everyone needs to know a little bit of a technical solution, even if it's Excel. If we look at the investments itself, we see that this trend persists. So we look at the usage of Gen AI, and we can see that it's not necessarily just software development teams which are using Gen AI, although we all know that we are using it, but it's also the business people themselves. This leads us to an interesting point, which is, if data teams on the data engineering side are already working with better, more structured tools like dbt and better principles like the analytics engineering concepts, and the machine learning engineers are already working with Gen AI to increase the performance and power of their businesses, could we join these two things together and provide them with a solution that takes opportunities of both at a lower cost?
In the beginning, what João mentioned was that the foreman was someone that was responsible to oversee operations and ensure that everything is running smoothly. In this sense, the concept of the data warehouse foreman would be someone that manages data and operations, and it would be a mix between the business knowledge within the company, the usage of a data warehouse managed by dbt, preferably, and AI technologies like the Gen AI. In particular, for the Gen AI, you will see this diagram in every talk, but here we go. There's a common buzzword, that's the retrieval augmented generation, or the RAG. And the idea is that it's an improvement over the traditional prompting that's limited to the model's existing knowledge. So the idea of the RAG is that you use, okay, sorry. So the idea of the RAG is that we use retrieval from an external knowledge source, and we augment the model's existing knowledge. Our point is that the knowledge source is probably the most crucial element within this type of architectures, and it's the component that we want to spend more time here. So if we are thinking of what would be a RAG built by a foreman, it would be some solution where there's the data warehouse that's leveraged by dbt, but where the knowledge source is being provided by the dbt automatic documentation. There can be some processing in the middle because we might not want everything that's being outputted by dbt, but it's a great start to start encoding the semantic knowledge. Of course, RAG is more than just a knowledge source, so we want just to spend 2 words in each of the other components. For the LLM, this is where your GPTs, llamas, and Claudes come into place, and our word is just see what is your company policy and test it for your use case. We advise to spend more time on the vector store because it's one of the most important parts, because you want to make sure that the information you are retrieving and the way you are saving your files in vector format, it's important. Regarding the orchestrator, usually it comes down to the battle between LangChain and Llama Index. We just want to remind you that there's always a third option, which is build yourself your own orchestrator. Sometimes it's easier because these tools may be overly complex for production applications. Just as a demo for this session, we played a bit with dbt, and we built a simple project with the information we could find about Data Makers Fest. And if you remember Sam's talk, there's a thing called the dbt models. So we built 5 dbt models for the speakers, sessions, talks, the tutorials, the attractions, and the partners. And each one encapsulates everything we could find on the website about that topic. The idea was to see if just by outputting the dbt docs, we could improve an existing model. So the first thing we did was to take a generic LLM and ask, what is Data Makers Fest? The answer, it makes sense, but it sounds a bit generic. So we kept on trying to see where it would start to hallucinate. We know that's an event that celebrates data science and analytics. If we ask where is it hosted, it says it can vary each year, which is starting to get a bit odd, but nevertheless, we can still give the benefit of the doubt. If we ask it to tell us one of the cities where it has been hosted, it's mentioned San Francisco, and then we know it's starting to hallucinate. And then everything we ask from now on is just generic info that's present in every conference. So what we did was to implement the Foreman architecture. So implementing the data warehouse managed by DBT, we use, just as an example, the GPT-4o model and improve their capabilities with DBT documentation without much pre-processing. And we could see that the answers started to already improving. We could get a lot more detailed and correct explanations, especially about what is Data Makers Fest. We already have the location, so we didn't need to follow up on that. One of the interesting things was when we started to get a bit more specific, for example, where are the tutorials taking place? And I skipped a slide, sorry. For example, what type of sessions does it have? One of the things we did in the models was that we separated the normal talks and the tutorials just to see what type of answers we got, and then just by organizing things this way, we could get answers that aligned with the way we organize information. The benefit is that we didn't need to do anything. We didn't need to develop a knowledge source. We just needed to output the documentation of the data warehouse that we already had and use it as a knowledge source. A very interesting capability that we can use for this type of Foreman racks is the text-to-SQL use cases. Because of the nature of DBT, it's used mostly with SQL, and also the fact that every model has a schema that's associated. So we already have tables, we have descriptions, we have columns. So what it takes to do this type of text-to-SQL use cases is just being intelligent about parsing the DBT docs, because sometimes it has things that we don't want. And also, of course, forcing the model to answer in SQL, which was what we did with this prompt template, but it's just very simple. We just mentioned output this in SQL format. Of course, there's questions that we didn't need a RAG to do it. How many sessions do we have? We know that's a count from the sessions table. But if we're starting to get more specific, for example, asking how many partners of each type do we have, we know, or the model knows, that there's no type column, but there's indeed a tier column. So in this case, we should group by tier and count how many rows we have. When we get to a point where we need to know relations, there's something that might not be explicit in DBT, but it can provide some hints if these relations are documented. When we asked if there are any speakers with more than one participation, the model knew that we had to do a union between the sessions and tutorials that we separated in two in purpose, because this relation is mentioned in the documentation, and also there are similar keys, and of course that was a hint to do this union before doing the group by. We tried a harder example, which was what's the number of organizations that have speakers in the event. And one thing we did was, in the speaker model, we created a role column that was a concatenation between the position of the speaker and also its organization. So we documented that choice, and the model knew that it had to get only the last part, which was the organization, from the role column before counting and doing the distinct. So our lessons, or at least the things that we want to to share with you, because this is just a very simple example, something that you can do in a couple of hours. But of course, once you get into production and once you get into the real data, the performance will drop. This is not every solution will be just output the DBT documentation. Sometimes when you have hundreds of columns and hundreds of schemas, you need to get a bit creative. But the tip is many times just doing something like this, which can leverage. If you are already using DBT, it can improve your Gen AI application or your AI application by a lot. The second lesson that we learned is we need to be consistent in terms of semantic. We need to think of large language models as like a super smart analyst that joins your company. He might be super smart, but sometimes he's missing the nuances of your data. So you need to be explicit about that, and you need to be consistent. The third one, and it was the one that convinced Data Makers Fest to let us both here into the stage, was that data engineers and machine learning engineers should work together. Because we see in many data teams that the data engineers are doing DBT initiatives, machine learning engineers are doing Gen AI initiatives. They can achieve more by working together and doing something like this, and using the concept of a Foreman to join these two technologies. The two takeaways that we like you to leave here with are that you should invest in good documentation, and you should use what you already have to improve generative AI applications in a cheaper way. Many teams are using DBT. Almost every team is using generative AI or exploring generative AI. By being smart about the way we join these two technologies, we can build applications that are cost-effective, both in development costs and also maintainability, but also that are very flexible. You can use prompt templates to guide the models to different types of outcomes, either text, SQL, etc. But more important, you can define a style, you can define guidelines and a common vocabulary with the business teams to make sure we are speaking the same language. Thank you, have a nice day in Porto, and remember to put your documentation, do your work.